Let's talk about boundaries. And this is a very, very negative subject, because usually when we say boundaries, it's just like, lines. And that's because literally that's what it means. Boundaries means really drawing lines, and it's about separation. It's about where are the lines that are mine and where are the lines that are yours. So if we were a country, if I was a country, the question is, where are the borders of this country? So the moment I say lines, the moment I say boundaries, the moment I say separation, we understand that this boundary thing is about safety. It's about feeling safe. It's about knowing where you end and where I start, or the other way around. It's about you and me, which is a great tool for survival. No problem. We need to survive. But it also can be a great tool when it's applied in a healthy and correct way for thriving, because that's also an important part of the boundaries. Boundaries are necessary because until we feel safe and protected, it's very hard to connect. It's very hard to grow. It's very hard to even move forward sometimes. We get really obsessed with whether or not the boundaries that we have were respected. Here's the problem about boundaries, that I would love for you to respect my boundaries, but if I haven't taken the effort and time to clarify what those boundaries are, then it would be very difficult for you to know it. Meaning, if I didn't know it, like clearly at least, how could you know it and how could you respect it? So a lot of responsibility about boundaries and boundary settings really comes to the person. It comes to me. It is my responsibility to clarify it. It's my responsibility to make sure that I talk to you about it, or show you at least, and then make sure that it is respected and it's really fulfilled. But without that, leaving it up to other people, it becomes very challenging, because people hardly know their own boundaries, let alone other people's boundaries. So it's very difficult to expect, and almost unreasonable to expect, that others need to know it and others need to respect it when I didn't do anything to really clarify it and communicate it. So let's talk about different kinds of boundaries. Everybody is okay so far? Any questions so far? Okay. So we have two kinds of boundaries, because it's very interesting. The very boundary that allows me to feel safe and secure and comfortable and present is the very one that I may use to really not move forward, not be into growth, not be exposed to different ways, not to be open-minded or open-hearted. What do I mean? What I mean is, sometimes we draw lines and boundaries that are not very healthy. I do that because I don't even want to connect. I do that because I don't even want to go further. I don't even want to know more. I don't even want to really transform. I just call it boundaries. Really what it is, I call it a cage that I've put myself in, so that I can get protected from anything and everything, which is not a right thing, because, all right, there are some dangers there. There are some things out there that we need to protect ourselves from, or some people. But what is the percentage of that? How many times a day, unless we have a very specific kind of life, or very geographically we live somewhere that is very dangerous, that danger of like my life and death kind of danger doesn't exist most of the time. So I divide boundaries into two general categories. Boundaries that are healthy and they actually help me to feel safe and hence grow. So they allow me to survive, and they facilitate my thriving and my growth and my learning. There are boundaries that actually are there to really protect me from going further. So I call them unhealthy boundaries. And just these two distinctions is very important for us to pay attention to, because we just always protect our boundaries. So like, I have to have boundaries. And yes, we need to have boundaries. But what was the intention of this boundary? When I set it, did I have growth in mind? Did I have safety in mind? Did I have connection in mind? Or did I have like only separation for the sake of separation, not because of safety? So two kinds of boundaries: healthy boundaries that facilitate growth and eventually, believe it or not, facilitate connection. I'll give you an example. For instance, if I have a boundary, for instance, exactly what I just said, actually, about the group, my team can do so much, right? If we don't draw these boundaries, I will have a team that is working like 24/7 and answering everybody. Well, they can't do that. And it's not good for them. And it's not good for our team. So we need to say, what are the things that we can do? And what are the things that we can't do? However, we say that because we want to serve you better. It's not because we want to be separated from you. We do that because we want to serve you. We want to listen to you. We want to send everything to everybody, and so on and so forth. Or at the personal level, say I tell my loved ones that, at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, whatever the time is, that's when I really need to separate and go to bed or be in my space and read my book. This is not because I want to separate. It's actually because most of us really charge on our own, and I need to charge so that I can be with them better. So even though in that moment I'm separating from them, the long-term intention of my boundary is to be with them in a healthier, more present, and more loving way. Because you know what happens when we are tired and we have not eaten and we are upset and we haven't basically attended to ourselves, and then people are around us, usually doesn't go well. So that's a healthy boundary, that I know that these are my boundaries. These are the things I can do, and these are the things I can't do. But I do them or don't do them because long term, I want to connect with people. I want to be really loving and present and aware and curious and all those wonderful things, compassionate when I'm with them. The unhealthy boundary is that when the purpose of it is to close the doors. So you tell me there's this event happening, there's this person coming, you said, I just don't like those kind of people. Well, I haven't even gone to see who they are and what they have to say, but I'm just closing the doors. A lot of people are allergic to even the name of that word, mindfulness. And I remember once I was talking in a plane, those days that we traveled, and a gentleman was sitting next to me and he asked me, what do you do? And I told him, I said, I'm a mindfulness teacher. And he said, oh, you sound very reasonable. This was after we've talked about 10 minutes. I said, and mindfulness teachers aren't? He said, no, I just thought they're just for like, hooey people. I said, what is that? Hooey people. He said, like these unreasonable people who are just like always saying things like, that makes no sense. And I laughed. I said, how many mindfulness teachers do you know? He thought about it. He said, actually, you're the first one. I said, okay. So that's the kind of thing. And we all have it, by the way. I mean, we both laughed about it because I confessed about what I felt about some other groups. And we all have it. And those are the programmed autopilot in survival mode kind of boundaries that we have set. And we don't even know where they came from. Most of the time, they're borrowed. Could be culture, bigger culture, family culture, religious culture. They told us these people with these beliefs, like, don't talk to them. So we have set these bars that are really for the purpose of separation. And until I open them, even if they activate me, even if like this gentleman would have been activated by the words that I use, the things I was saying, it was good for him to really go a little bit further than the word that he was stuck with. So, or whatever, words I had that I was talking about. I can't remember, so that's why I'm not mentioning it. But I remember that I had a really honest conversation with him. I said, because he felt embarrassed. And I said, I have my own, biases, and this is where I'm stuck. And then we had a conversation about that. So that's the example of unhealthy boundaries, and meaning lines that we have drawn. I do not want to hear about these things. I do not want to. So that's that. And the other one is the one that really, really, I'm separating myself because I want to connect. I'm separating myself because I want to grow. I'm separating myself because through this self-care, through these lines, I actually can be more present, more connecting, and more open to whatever it is that is coming. So this is very important because we always talk about the good aspect of boundaries, and it's very good. And we're going to talk about how to do them a lot and why we don't do them, by the way. But it's also important that we pay attention to what I call the shadow of boundaries, which is this, that we do it to really close the doors and disconnect and separate from the world, and hence never get the opportunity to grow or work through whatever it is that we thought we couldn't connect to. I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions, insights, objections.
Quick question, Mitra. Are we also going to talk about boundaries within ourselves? For example, a very strong emotion that wants to be attended to now, and having the boundary from our awareness saying, no, right now, no, maybe later.
Yes, definitely. So that is really saying no aspect. And that's a very insightful question, Karina. Yes, because when we learn to say no and really have a healthier relationship with saying no, a big part of saying no is actually saying no also to myself. That's what we were talking about, urge surfing in another class when we're talking about addiction. That's actually a huge part of discipline, where I have this urge to answer. I have this urge to eat. I have this urge to react. I have so many urges on this programmed self. And when I learn to say at least no, or maybe not now, but no in this moment. Yes, we're going to talk about that too, because that's a huge aspect of saying no. We practice it with ourselves, and then we'll take it out to the world and say it to other people lovingly. All right. Thank you.
Hi. So is saying no actually allowing room for growth in our current phase of life?
Saying no is a very healthy way of looking at our life and our boundaries, because we have very unhealthy relationship with saying no. And if you want, I can go to it a little bit more. I was planning to do it next week, but here's why we don't say no. When we are in survival mode, one of the questions that we have, and we don't have many questions in survival mode, one of them is, do I fit in? Do I fit in? Meaning, and it shows in different areas, in different places. Are you going to accept me? Am I going to be accepted? Am I going to be one of you? And you could be a workplace, you could be family, you could be social setting, so many you. And when that in survival mode is my major question, I am afraid to be me. I show up as a person that I assume you want me to be. So the authentic Mitra is not there. Who it's there is the frightened Mitra. And I'm extremely cognizant of the fact that I am just standing on the edge. And if I just go a little bit here or there, you may not like me. Because remember, I'm in survival mode. The energy of survival mode is pure fear. So I'm standing there, hoping, praying, expecting that you will sort of accept me. And I'm so wobbly here. And then you ask me to do something. Oh my God, would I ever say no? Well, if I say it, I think it's going to be at a price when I really think there is no other way but to say no. But I don't see myself in a position that I dare to say no, because I think the moment I say no, I'm going to lose that acceptance that I may have had with you. So it's very interesting what happens when I step out of survival and stand at a little bit different place. And I say, you know what? I'm safe as I am. I'm okay. And let me see if what you're asking of me, or as Karina said, what I am asking of me is doable, reasonable, and healthy for me. I see a choice only when I step out of that survival mode. So I can't say no because I think my livelihood depends on that. I think if I say no, you're going to reject me or reject me further. So I won't dare to say no. No is one of the healthiest words in this language or any language, but we don't use it like that because our association with no in the survival mode is rejection. It's things that are bad, that like, I don't care for you, I don't love you. I always tell people, because I love you, I actually offer my absence to you sometimes. And it's all about the healthy boundaries that I was talking about, that sometimes my absence is the most loving thing I can do for my loved ones. And it's not because I don't love them, and it's not because I don't want to be with them. It's because I just don't have the capacity to be with other people or the capacity to do what you're asking me to do. So I hope that answered your question. It was a long answer. We're going to get into no for the whole session next week, because I think it's such an important topic that we have learned collectively and individually not to say no, and then become extremely passive aggressive about our relationship. Because now I start resenting you because I couldn't say no to you. And the dynamics of power changes, and it goes to a very, very interesting place. Okay, so back to boundaries. So we had healthy boundaries, we had unhealthy boundaries. We had two kinds of boundaries. And I want, what we're talking about and what we will be talking about is the healthy boundaries and how to work with them, how to set them, how to get comfortable with them, and how to be consistent with them. There are many different aspects to boundaries. There is the physical boundaries, you know, when how close, and that's very cultural. If you go to the Middle East, oh my God, like the space is not, there are almost no boundaries. And that's cultural. That's culture. Actually, it's being close and being one with each other, being part of the community. There is the financial boundaries. How far would I go to spend? What is our boundaries? How much do you spend? How much do I spend? When do I come in? Where do you come in? Where do we come in? So financial, boundaries. There are sexual boundaries. A lot of areas, putting back my human rights commissioner hat on, a lot of cases that I dealt with was about, sexual boundaries, that what is acceptable by people, what does that mean, and that's interesting. A part of it goes back how to say no and how to mean no and how to understand and take no. So from one side giving, but on one side receiving. There are relationship boundaries, like what are our relationship, how close are we, how intimate are we, how far can I go, how much can I ask for, how much can I share with you. So those lines are important. But the main areas that we see are the boundaries then when we give too much, when there is no line, or we will get asked too much. One is that I am giving too much. Two is receiving too much responsibilities, too much demands, too much whatever. So these are the most common one that we experience in life. But really, these are very very situational and very, very cultural, because as you know, the same boundary that you may have with one person, it may not be the same with other people. Why? Because of the nature of your relationship, because sometimes of the conditions, things that you ask for, things that you do that normally you wouldn't. But really to be present to that, because we talked about mindful boundaries. What is mindful boundaries? To understand that boundaries are really flexible. They're not as set as we think they are, because a lot of it depends on what's going on and what's happening, and either in general or in this present moment. But the way I define mindful boundaries is to be aware and present to our own lines, to our own boundaries, and to be curious and accepting of other people's boundaries, because that's something that is important. And doing all of that, both for myself and others, with a sense of compassion. So you see all 5 aspects of mindfulness, which is awareness, presence, curiosity, compassion, and acceptance, are all ingredients of mindful boundaries. So I'm aware. I know there are different boundaries. I know that I have a responsibility. So that's awareness. I'm present because I know every situation is different. I'm very present to what's going on right now between us and how I feel. That's a huge part of it, because remember, it was about safety. How do I feel? Sometimes we don't gauge this feeling and we leave it for the time that it's gone just too far. And by then, I'm just so reactive, and it's hard to resolve or communicate the lines that I could have really communicated back then in a very gentle and compassionate way. So I need to be present to what's going on. Then I talked about curiosity, meaning really curiosity means openness of the mind. That to know that if I'm in the dance with you, and whenever we're in a relationship, we're dancing, I need to also be curious about your boundaries. I also need to be curious really about your needs for safety. And, your boundaries may be very different than mine because of cultural, situational experiences you had, the age you have, the conditions you have, and so many other conditions. And then I need to be accepting of that. I don't need to necessarily agree with what you set as boundary, but I need to be very respectful and honoring of them. And I need to do all these in the sauce of compassion. Why? Because remember, this was all about safety. So if I am worried about my boundaries and my lines, if I am somehow compromising your lines, it means that somebody here, maybe both of us, is not feeling really safe. So there's a lot of needs for compassion to be present as we set boundaries, as we communicate boundaries, as we insist in our boundaries, or get curious about other people's boundaries. And this is very important aspect of a difference between just boundary setting, which is a very mind sort of exercise, than the mindful boundary setting, which takes into consideration many, many different aspects and needs of everybody. Okay, so any questions about the definitions and the different kinds and the things we talked about?
It's about no. So I know you're going to discuss that tomorrow, but just, are there people who say no too much? I mean, that are extreme no's, and then you don't know how to deal with those kinds.
Exactly. Remember, I was talking about unhealthy boundaries. When people say no for the sake of no, which is like a protection for something that doesn't even need to be there. Yes, and that's an unhealthy no. And how we deal with that, as I said, we're going to talk about that, but it's important to understand that there may not be much we can do, because you see, there's a free will at work here. And there's so much that you can tell me that how unhealthy my no is and all that. You can communicate that with me. You can show me how to say no in a healthy way, and then you to say yes in a healthy way. But really to expect that you can change me just because now you know what no's are healthy and what no's are unhealthy, that will not happen. There is no course that can show you how to change other people. You can change your relationship with people, but very rarely you can change people, even if they are living with you, especially when they're living with you. So, yeah. So, yeah. Any other?
So I guess we're always talking about emotional boundaries, right?
No, no.
Ah,
There is emotions in every boundary. Thank you for reminding me. But we want to, the most important boundary is the emotional boundary. And we're going to actually talk about that as a separate entity because that's so important, because that dictates all the other. But there are emotions, you're right in that sense. There are emotions in every boundary, especially when it gets compromised. And emotions are actually a tool for understanding when I'm just feeling about something. That's a beginning of knowing that I'm getting close to an uncomfortable place and I'm not feeling comfortable about it. But emotional boundaries are completely a different subject. That means, how do I protect myself from the emotions in the room? How do I stay in a relationship with you without picking up every time you go up and down? Because it's bad enough for me to go up and down with my emotions. Now you're going to go up and down. And then like our friends are going to go up and down. So I'll be like all the time. But we learn to understand how to sail, and it's really sailing, and how to learn how to work with this waves of emotions, when to witness them, when to take them a little bit in, and when to say, I'm really sorry that you're feeling that way. But go ahead. I may have stopped you from asking your questions. I'm sorry.
Yes, I feel that. But if I am picturing boundaries as like a fence between me and the thing, whether it be energy or emotion, where I get in trouble and I need clarification on is I can put that fence in the ground, but stuff comes in underneath. It seeps in through the bottom, above the top.
Yes.
And what I'm curious about is, then what? How, and I know that's maybe an abstract question. I don't know. I'm not thinking out loud.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. But that's where I get in trouble with my clients and my relationships is tell myself I have boundaries. I come up with tools to ensure those boundaries are in place. I exercise good habits, but man, stuff creeps in and makes it murky. And it becomes an energetic boundary that I am trying to understand how to create. So that is my question for you.
Mm-hmm. So as I'm listening to you, I'm observing a little bit of reaction, because the moment you said it creeps in and like emotions came, and that's exactly the work we need to do. And the work is for me to be able, because I'm certain of what I'm doing and I've done my homework and I am in a place that I feel okay with my boundaries, and I'm very aware of where very clear about where my boundaries are. And then I witness somebody, as you said, like creeping in from the above or underneath or around or wherever hole they can find. But you see, my job is not to stop that. My job is to respond to that when it arrives. Because when I go back to survival mode, I want to stop it. I want to catch you. I want to tell you how wrong you are in doing that. But when I am not in that mode and I see it happening, I can very gently remind the person, or very gently remind myself how to respond now. Because their creeping in, as you called it, brings a reactive me out. Now I'm reactive, whoever you may be to me, either a client and the clarity and the compassion that I'm talking about allows you to consistently, and that's a key word, really say it to me. And eventually I get it. I may not get the reason for it. I may not even buy into it, but somehow I get it. And even if I don't get it, you just need to just say, sorry, Mitra, no, we'll finish at 10. That's it. And the fact that you get reactive, if you do, is because you haven't had enough clarity and practice. When I'm good at it, it's fine. I mean, the person can do it, and that's fine. They're not even doing it intentionally. They're doing it because they are not aware of their own boundaries, not curious about my boundaries, and definitely not accepting of them. But my job is not to convert anyone. My job is to guard my own boundaries and communicate them as many times as possible. And sometimes you need to take an action. It's not always words. Sometimes it's like, I'm sorry, Sinead, thank you so much, but I think it's time for me to leave. And leaving is one of the options, not the only option, but one of the options. So make it your work to take care of you, as opposed to make it your work to change them. Because this is what brings frustration. I can never, ever change you. But I can always, I'm using really strong words that I always say, please don't use in the mindful world. I say don't use ever and never and always. And I'm saying I'm using it because it can be done. I can never change you in a sustainable way unless you want to. I can always be in command of myself. And all of our work needs to be around command. Believe it or not, most of our expectations is on this side, hence our frustration. We're hoping that we can just one day change this person, and we'll be disappointed for the rest of our lives because we can't. We can't. And it's not even our job. It's not my job to change anybody. But it's my job to be awake and aware of what's happening to me all the time. That's what is my job. And that's what's possible, by the way, because it's in my command. I can always be present. I'll fail, but I can try again. So the frustration comes from a different expectation. If I am present to my own boundaries and I'm very clear about them, I can stay in my space and that's the energetic, by the way. That's the energetic boundaries, which gets mingled in with the intention of changing other people and then remembering the memories. I told you that last time too. I can't believe you did it again. So I go to that world as opposed to coming to this world. I said, it doesn't matter. She's done it 45 times. This is 46 times. That's okay. That's good. No problem. I'm still here. I'm still solid and clear. All of our work is for ourselves because that's the only person we have access to. And the moment you get frustrated, believe me, because you've gone here. Or you expect too much from yourself, you're a perfectionist. So only places that we get upset. All right. Are there any questions? If not, what? Yes?
We have a couple.
Okay.
What are Mitra's suggestions for when your own threshold for having your boundaries encroached upon is very sensitive based on past experience with others not respecting them? Yeah. How do you build up more of a tolerance in order to be able to communicate earlier on and without being or appearing guarded?
Thank you. I think you just answered your own question. Prevention, my dear, is always better than cure. So I do a lot of communications of boundaries, a lot, sometimes almost unnecessary, but I do it because I have no idea what's going to happen. So I make sure, and something simple. It doesn't need to be even very important and life-changing thing. It could be something like I have a need for after a few hours to have me time. I do not do well for 8 hours of being with people. So if I get invited, the days we went out, I always say, is that okay if I leave by 9? And you don't know what that does. You don't know how people remember. I mean, how many times people come and say, is it okay? We're serving this and that. I know you need to leave by 9. They have 40 people, but they remembered my 9. And that's prevention. That's one. Do a lot of preventative work. 2, please be aware, because you were, of the fact that a lot of your reaction may be coming from a previous experience and may have nothing to do with this particular relationship. And when we become aware of that, then we also understand that half of what I'm feeling is about this person, not about this person. it happens a lot in relationships. The poor present person is paying for the army of people that other people dated and were with. And, you're thinking, where did that come from? I know where it came from. It came from all the women and men we dated. It came from all of that. And now I have the word is trauma, undigested emotion and memory. To me, that's what trauma is. I have not digested this memory or this trauma or this experience. And now you're going there. So I'm very sensitive. It's just like, oh, this looks like that. Awareness, compassion, and curiosity about, is there another way? Is there a better way? If I was not so sensitive, just get curious. I'm not even saying go there. If I wasn't, I wonder how it would show up. Would I be this reactive? So it's important that you bring, and that's the boundary that we talked about, healthy, unhealthy, a part of unhealthy boundaries showing up here because it doesn't belong to this poor person or this situation. But it's my memory of being whatever. And when the moment you even remember that, you shed a light on that, it becomes easier to work with. Because when these things are in the dark, they have such a huge hold on us. I always say, if I turn off the light and start making noises, you will go crazy. What is this? I wonder what it is. And you turn it on and you see either it's a paper or it's a little mouse or something. It's fine, whatever it is. But it's just that not knowing has a hold on us. My memory of that is my brother used to put a sheet on his face. And it used to frighten the hell out of me. I mean, I would beat him up when he didn't have sheet on. But the moment he put the sheet on, it was I would say, oh, don't do that. He knew I was frightened. It's really interesting. And in a way, we live like that. It's the same thing, but when it has a cover on it, it frightens us. But when the cover is off, it's just like, I know what to do with that. It's the same old. I know exactly what to do. I did an exercise once with fear. I have actually a poem about that. I should read it once. It's like, it's the old fear. I'm not afraid of fear. I've known fear for so long. So you take the energy of fear, the energy of vagueness and unknownness and in the dark away, and you show up with a different sense of presence. That thing has a hold on you because it's not known to you in that moment. The moment you say, ooh, this smells and tastes like that undigested experience that I had with that person in that time, you separate this experience from that. You bring the learnings. We don't want to completely throw out these wonderful traumas that we had. There is a learning. And once you learn the lesson, as my teacher used to say, you no longer need the experience. We're experiencing the same thing over and over again because we haven't gotten the lesson and we haven't digested the experience. All right. Megan, do we have any more questions?
This is kind of a very specific question, but I'm a therapist, so I'm just wondering, will you talk about, I know you were talking about preventatively setting boundaries, and this isn't about patience, but what will you talk about, like narcissism? In other words, like once you get involved in a relationship and you realize you haven't set boundaries with specific pathologies, it's even harder to then, sometimes you just have to completely separate, especially with a narcissistic personality disorder. But like, how does one prevent that, I guess? Will you talk about pathology at all?
No, I won't. No, I won't talk about pathology because that's basically a very specific work. Right. But what I do talk about is about the responsibility of me to work with any pathology. And as you know, as a medical professional, there are type of characters that do not recognize, do not even see or respect boundaries. And so job is, of course, much more difficult when that happens. But that's a very interesting question that we would bring it. And I know there are situations that are exceptions, but why am I even attracted to such a relationship? Why am I even in this relationship? How do I work that? What is it that needs to be worked? So the work really in the mindfulness world, at least the work I do, always comes back to self, because it really understands that there is not much I can do in that person. Of course, there are things that medical professionals say, do this and do that, especially if they're a family member. But in general, there's not much I can do to change. And when we really understand that, we save a lot of our energy, because in the practical world where I see, it's interesting, I call it from bedroom to boardroom to courtroom, because that's exactly the scope of where I work. I see the same thing. Most of our energies go to a place where it's least useful. So I spend so much time to prove to this person that they're a narcissist. And at best, it's like, okay, I am. Like, instead of learning how I can work with a narcissist in my life or in my workplace or whatever it is. So it really saves us. The mindfulness work saves us from spending our energy where it's not going to be useful, or at least it won't be productive. And so that's the work we do, but not the work of, because that's a very specific work, as you said. I mean, narcissism is a world on its own, and I could not go in there in that 4 weeks. Maybe we just allocate 4 weeks working with narcissists. I'm putting topics together for 2021, and maybe that would be one of them. Thank you for your question.